Hey, welcome everyone to the Global Justice Center's Almost Every Monday program. Today, we are very happy to have Lee Ragsdale and Erick Nava Palomino, who are going to talk about their own lived experience of incarceration and deportation. Very timely topic for now. If any of you want to be on our mailing list, we have a sign up sheet right here that if you're not on. And they're going to introduce themselves as part of the program. So I'll just turn it over to Lee and Erick.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting us to speak today. The topic, a very ambitious one, we realize, is incarceration and deportation, a lived experience. So it occurs to me this could be an entire graduate seminar. So we're only going to be scratching the surface. But if there's certain things you have questions about, feel free to pipe up and we can go in one direction or another in terms of what you're interested in learning more about. We both work for an organization called the Education Justice Project. That's the giant yellow logo, and I'll explain more about that in just a moment. All right, I'm going to pass it to Erick to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erick. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation. So we work for the Education Justice Project, and there I coordinate their emergency fund where we provide monetary assistance to people getting out of prison in the state of Illinois. I also coordinate the scholarship program where we offer 8 scholarships a year to people affected by incarceration. It could be people in prison, people formerly incarcerated, family members of people formerly incarcerated, and even staff of people in IDOC, Illinois Department of Corrections.
Since he's being shy, a couple more things about him. He's part of the founding group of students of the Education Justice Project, which we'll tell you about in a minute. He also advises on the Prison to Gown Pathway program, and he's the co-author of... ¿Qué pasó? I was.
Do you have to mute?
I think I was muted. Hello. Okay, so he's co-authored several papers on teaching in prison. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm his wife and also the co-author of a book that we're going to talk to you about today called A New Path, A Guide to the Challenges and Opportunities After Deportation. I heard this term just a couple years ago and it made sense to me, co-deported. So the spouse of someone who's deported, who essentially is also deported from the US, living in Mexico here with my husband. He's originally from Michoacan, where we have a home and where we run an animal rescue, hence the dog photo. But we've been living here in San Miguel for the last 2.5 years. Here is a photo dump, which I thought might be fun. The first photo, oops, nope. Do I need to share my screen again? Yes. Did y'all see the other? Okay, so it just happened. Am I able to share my screen again? Oh,
No, it should be up here.
I'm not sure what you'd like for me to do. Yeah. Okay, so here's a photo dump. This is Erick and I in Danville Correctional Center, where he was incarcerated and I was teaching as a grad student. The second photo is our first picture together outside of prison in rural Michoacan. Here we are in our Mexi Pets Schwag, the animal rescue organization that we founded. and a recent family photo with Erick's mother, niece, and nephew. I threw in a nice wedding picture and our recent 10th anniversary picture. So just wanted to share those with you to personalize things a bit. So this organization we keep talking about, it's called the Education Justice Project. These are some of our students. They're men who are incarcerated in a medium security state prison in central Illinois called Danville Correctional Center. So we are principally a college and prison program. So we offer upper division courses from the University of Illinois to about 75 students at that prison. Anything you want to share about EJP?
Yeah, well, aside from bringing higher education to prison, what EJP also did was give us tools while incarcerated to create programs in the prison. For example, I co-founded a program called Language Partners, where university professors came into the prison, taught us how to be English as a second language teachers, and then we started a program and started teaching the men in the prison that couldn't communicate in English. That's one of the programs we started there.
As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, we're based at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which is the flagship campus of the University of Illinois system, about 2.5 hours south of Chicago. And we don't only have the college and prison program, which in and of itself is pretty robust. It includes 12 programs, including a computer lab, a mindfulness discussion group, language partners, academic advising. And if you're familiar with the politics of college in prison, which I don't expect you to be, in '94, you might remember the crime bill that Clinton passed. That took away Pell Grants for incarcerated students. And so hundreds of college and prison programs shut down overnight. EJP is kind of part of this next generation that figured out how to do college and prison with foundation funding. So we've been around about 16 years. In addition to the college and prison work, our reentry resource program is a large program that I direct that I'm going to talk about in a moment. We also have a policy and research program where we attempt to affect policies specifically in Illinois as it relates to access to higher education in prison. And we have something called a prison to gown pathway, which is a new program where we provide holistic services to formerly incarcerated people so that they can continue their education at the University of Illinois. So to zoom out a bit, I want to talk about incarceration in the United States. You're probably aware in broad strokes of the situation. There's currently about 2 million people incarcerated in prisons and jails in the US, or 580 per 100,000 residents. So you might already know that this is the highest of any other independent democracy. Countries like El Salvador, unfortunately, have surpassed us now. But when you compare us to, countries in Europe, for instance, and in the developed world, we stand out in that area. The population did drop nationally after COVID, in part in response to COVID, but it has been rising since. I had to Google this fact the other day, and I was very sad to see that there's still the death penalty in 27 states. I became an activist initially opposing the death penalty in the state of Illinois, which was successful. And I thought for sure by now, there's just a handful of states that still kill their residents, but unfortunately that's not true. And nearly every state allows some form of solitary confinement. I was also really sad to learn because obviously that's a barbaric practice that we know is a form of torture. I'm not sure if you can see this very well, but the Prison Policy Initiative is a really good source for information on incarceration in the United States. So this is just a quick overview. It's about 1 million people in state prisons, which is the largest. They're individual systems, but the bulk of people are in those systems. About 500,000 in local jails, and then everything else combined is about 1/4, which is federal prisons and jails, as well as youth facilities and immigrant detention. So this is from a couple years ago. Immigrant detention is higher now, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Anything you want to add about mass incarceration in the US?
Well, I can talk about my personal experience of being in segregation for 14 straight months. Is that a lot of people in segregation, people think, oh, they must have done something bad in prison, so they're put in segregation as punishment. But in my experience there, majority of the people in segregation, and I'm not a doctor, but people are mentally ill and they need help, but they're not receiving it, so they keep them in segregation for years.
Thanks for sharing. So I realize this is a lot of information for one slide. I'm not following PowerPoint best practices, but I did want to be sure and share a snapshot of immigrant detention and deportation in the U.S. currently. We have an immigration attorney here, so feel free to pipe up if any of this needs amending. But I did read recently that the U.S. just reached the highest population of detained immigrants in history with over 60,000, which is up from just 39,000 in early 2025. Excuse my paraphrasing, but the big bogus bill has tripled ICE's budget to $75 billion and increased the number of 287G contracts. So you might have heard that postal workers and local police now are deputized to arrest immigrants in our communities. That's part of this program. Just a couple weeks ago, you probably heard about Nome versus Perdomo, which is the new recent Supreme Court decision that allows federal immigration agents to consider factors like race or ethnicity, language use, location, and type of employment under the suspicion that individuals might be undocumented immigrants. And then you may have heard of the Laken-Riley Act, which mandates the detention of certain immigrants accused of crimes without an ability to ask for release while their case is pending. Anything else, immigration attorney, that we need to focus on in terms of just what's been happening the last little bit? Yeah. It's all unconstitutional and illegal, according to Rebecca Eichler, immigration attorney. Thanks for adding that in. Anything you want to add about immigration statistics or snapshot in the U.S.?
No.
So sometimes people think, okay, you're a college and prison program. What are you doing talking about immigration, or what's the connection? And this is kind of a simple list, but I just wanted to articulate this. You know, what is the connection between the criminal legal system and immigration? I think people who are concerned about incarceration and people being deprived of their liberty need to not make a distinction between the two, right? Because both involve separating people from their families and communities, which is destabilizing to communities, and depriving people of their liberty. Both limit access to information and education for people on the inside. So this obviously is of concern to people who want access to college and education in prison. You might have heard of GEO, the private prison corporation. So I'm probably telling this story out of order. I should say we produce materials for people who are incarcerated and deported. One is a prison reentry guide and the other is a deportation guide. Their education coordinator called me last year and said, we have a lot of people in detention. We want not just the prison reentry guide, we also want the deportation guide. And he went and asked his supervisor and they came back and said, no, we don't have, in our contract, we don't have to provide any educational materials to detained immigrants. Tell them we don't want the books. So it was horrifying to me to hear that because their contract didn't specify it, they weren't going to provide any education to, or even not just, you know, we're not talking about courses here. We're just talking about resources and books to people who were detained in their prisons. This obviously could also be another graduate seminar, but both systems aim to solve social problems. I would argue neither is doing that very well. And there's also this idea of crimmigration, right? That the two systems are merging in a sense. So you're probably aware that there's this kind of hyper criminalization of immigrants right now, which I think is used to justify a lot of times the detention and deportation of people. And there's also often immigration consequences for people with criminal records. So for instance, Erick hasn't shared a ton about his story, but because he was born in Mexico and then accused of a crime that he did not commit, he was deported after that incarceration. Do you want to share anything more here?
No.
Okay, so I mentioned that EJP has several programs. The one that I direct is called the Reentry Resource Program. Our mission is to connect people to resources for a healthy transition to life after prison and after deportation, to provide tools for self-empowerment, and also to recognize and address the trauma that people experience during incarceration, often before incarceration, right? That leads them to incarceration, deportation, and reentry. So as I mentioned, we're on a college campus. These are some students who come into our office and respond to these letters that we get from people in prisons throughout the United States, requesting our reentry guide or our deportation guide. Sure.
And I just want to emphasize the importance of the guide because yeah, the importance of the guide is because a lot of people in prison and a lot of people getting out of prison have never seen the internet. So a lot of people tell them like, oh, don't worry, when you get out, go online and get your ID or apply for a license or look for housing or monetary assistance. But nobody ever stops to think like they didn't have cell phones when this person was before incarceration. This person has never seen the internet, never had a laptop. So for something that we take for granted, like smartphones and computers, laptops, this technology, this is the best for them in the moment because they're preparing before they get out and they have a better idea and understanding of how to go about engaging in a world that doesn't exist, that they don't know.
Thanks. Yeah, I looked it up the other day. Illinois still has someone in prison since 1964. So imagine trying to transition to a healthy existence after being incarcerated for so long. So this is a bit about what we produce. The Illinois and National Prison Reentry Guides are called Mapping Your Future. College and prison programs increasingly are asking ourselves, how do we want to support students after they graduate from our programs and after they're released from prison? Some provide counseling, some provide individual academic advising post-release. What we decided that we would do is produce a resource. And the reason we decided to do this is because our students asked us to. They said, like Erick mentioned, when they were released from prison, they were given 4 pieces of paper stapled in the middle, Xerox so many times that you couldn't read it, of resources from the 90s. This is what the Illinois Department of Corrections would give to people as they were being released from prison. And they said, hey, y'all are professors and grad students and writers and researchers. Why don't you put something together? So we started doing that in 2015. So this blue book up here is now our 10th edition of the guide. I didn't bring a copy, I don't know why, but it's about the same size as our deportation guide. It's super comprehensive. As Erick said, people are locked up for decades and need all kinds of information, how to sign up for benefits, how to get your ID, how to reunite with your family, how to use a credit card. There's even a section where someone recounts their experience of using a debit card in the grocery line and how stressed they were, and everyone behind them was like, what are you doing? It's like he's writing a check or something. So all kinds of advice and information about re-entering after prison. We realized several years into producing that guide that we had students who were being deported after incarceration. Didn't make sense to hand them an Illinois specific guide. So after accompanying Erick through the experience of deportation and reestablishing his life here in Mexico, or really just establishing initially, because you were 4 months old when your parents took you to the US, right? We realized that we needed a guide for this population. So I went to our director, pitched the idea. She said, sounds great, write it. And so we did. So since 2018, we've been producing this guide, and I have copies if you're interested in looking through it. It's called A New Path, a guide to the challenges and opportunities after deportation. Do you want to share a bit about your deportation experience or why a guide like this might be needed? Okay. So we'll come back to him. But just to also mention, we also have a website where we have a database of Illinois-specific prison reentry resources, as well as a video series. One of those videos is called Preparing Mentally for Release. Looks like somebody I know is in that video. And that's all available on our website. No, there's a lot more, but I'm talking more about A New Path.
Oh, yeah. So, for example, when I got deported in 2013, there was no guide, right? They give you $20. Even though they knew I was going to be deported to Mexico, they were still requiring me to provide an address in the US for me to parole to. And if I didn't provide that address, they would violate my parole and I would have to do another 2 years, even though I was going to be deported afterwards. So having had some information of what to expect when I got to Mexico would have definitely been helpful and caused so much less stress. Because like Lee said, my parents took me to the US when I was 4 months old. I had visited Mexico, but I had never lived here. So now I'm going to a place I had never lived in. All my family they're all in LA and Chicago. Majority of them are US citizens now and residents. So having had a guide to get IDs and just the basic documentation you need to exist in a new country, because my name is different here. I have to use both my parents' last names here. In the US, it was just my dad's. So just these nuances that people don't think about would have been a lot. It would have been helpful for me to have at least a guide and a starting point. And I think that's one of the best reasons for the existence of this book, is to prepare people even before they get out. Because even if you have property getting out of prison, they're going to take it from you and you're not going to see it anyway. But if you already kind of have it in your head and take notes and kind of memorize what you need to do when you get out, even if you don't have this book when you get out, you have a better understanding of what's waiting for you.
So you might imagine this book is very in demand now. In fact, the day after the election, Rebecca messaged me and said, "Your book's going to be really in demand now." And I thought, no way. And she was right. So I get I got a call from a Canadian parole officer the other day asking for our Jamaica reentry guide. And I said, unfortunately, we don't have a deportation guide for Jamaica. The 4 countries we do cover are Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which are the top 4 countries that people are deported to from the US. But I'll tell you a little bit more about the guide. Originally the audience was folks who were incarcerated, whose deportation was almost a foregone conclusion. But then we realized that there was no resource like this just for undocumented people in the US who weren't in prison. And so we rewrote it for a wider audience, and we felt compelled to include information on know your rights, how to interact with ICE, how to plan for deportation, which, frankly, those existed. There are plenty of know your rights and deportation planning resources out there, but I've seen very few related to what to expect with the detention and deportation process, how to navigate life in Mexico and Central America, as well as a connection to resources in those countries. So we took that on. Oh, this is from Rebecca and I's presentation. I think you wrote this part. It includes things like red cards, which we don't really need them here, but I do have some in my bag in case anyone wants to see them. These are the cards that immigrants can carry with them and show to ICE if they're approached by ICE in the United States. We also talk about deportation planning, as I mentioned, gathering important documents. This is really painful to think about, but people need to designate a caregiver for their minor children in case they're picked up by ICE. And in all 50 states, there are different caregiver affidavits that are required. We encourage people to write down and memorize important phone numbers like that of an immigration attorney, but we have heard of cases recently where people aren't even allowed a phone call. So now what we're suggesting is that you have a buddy that you check in with daily, and if you don't check in with them, they call your attorney. We talk about packing a go bag. So when Erick was being held pre-deportation at Broadview Center in Chicago, I was able to drop off a backpack. It's kind of silly because I put shampoo in there. Wanted him to be extra prepared, but he was able to share that with some people who did have hair. Okay, so we also talk specifically about what to expect with the detention and deportation. So folks in Illinois, for instance, are usually dropped off at one of 2 points that are in common with the Texas-Mexico border, whereas someone in California would likely be dropped in Tijuana. They don't tell you where they're going to deport you to, I should say, so that you don't plan your return. So we try to give people as much information as possible so that they can feel a little bit more empowered and informed about the process. Erick was dropped at the border at night. He hadn't lived there since he was 4 years old, and they just opened the gate and said, "There's Mexico, go." Luckily, he had family, so he was able to take a bus to Michoacan. But we have friends who slept in parks at the border for a month, and we use their experiences to inform this resource, right? So what are the migrant shelters? Where are there soup kitchens? Where can you switch out of your clothes, right? Because you don't want to be wearing What were you wearing? They let you out in a sweatsuit, and then I had some clothes in the bag for you, right? Yeah.
Um, but one of my more memorable memories of being dropped off in the border in the middle of the night was the unity of all the people who got deported at the same time, because it was bus loads of us. And like Lee said, luckily I had family. So I had money. People, my family members, Lee, people just gave me money. So I had money like in my socks, in my underwear, like everywhere, because people are like, just hide it. Don't tell people you have money. But when we got to the bus terminal, uh, it's like a mob of us, and some people have money, some people don't. And some people are like, I have to go. My family's in Oaxaca. I don't have any money to get there. So the beautiful thing about that for me as a memory was that everybody that did have money, we all started pitching in, and we like, okay, I got in my head, I'm like, okay, I know how much I have, and I know how much I want to spend because I don't know what's waiting for me. So we were all pitching in and buying tickets for people, as many as we could, and it was, I remember thinking like, wow, people were like, everybody's being deported, everybody's stressed out. Some people don't even speak Spanish, but we're all like pitching in to help each other buy tickets, try to get you where you're going. And even then, we didn't have enough for everybody. But I don't know. That was a really good memory.
Sharing that. We also talk about how to stay safe at the border. So staying in a group is definitely key. But there are cases of recently deported people being targeted by cartels, kidnapped, um, because they think that you have connection to US dollars, which in many cases you do. And you stand out like a sore thumb if you've been in prison a couple decades and you maybe don't even speak Spanish and you've arrived in Mexico.
Well, even Mexican immigration tells you if you are from these states, don't walk to the bus terminal. Like, stay here with us and we'll take you to the bus terminal in the back of pickup trucks. And I was from one of those states. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to stay here. And I remember thinking when I was on the bus, and I was at first I thought I was like betrayed or something because we were getting to this place and I'm thinking, why am I arriving at this like military base? But it was just the bus terminal, like with sandbags on the corners. It was in Tamaulipas. Um, and I was like, okay. But it was definitely like shocking to be like, don't walk there. Don't. It was the middle of the night anyway. I wasn't gonna walk, but to think that you're being targeted because you're from this state, or like people think you have money, or somebody's gonna pay for you.
This last bullet point was inspired by Erick. When we were writing letters during his last year of incarceration, we were getting to know each other through the letters, and he said, I was born in Mexico, so I'm going to be deported after prison. But don't worry, I'll be back. I'll beat the bus back that dropped me off. And in that year of getting to know each other through letters and learning more about his case, I did some research and I realized, no, 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 you're not coming back. You face 20 years in a federal prison if you have a felony conviction in the US and you cross back. So for other rash people like Erick, we put that paragraph in there, said, no, no, please think twice about that decision. We also have information, as Erick mentioned, on very practical things like getting your IDs and documents, resources to meet basic needs, which I will say now, under the current Morena administration, there are a lot more social programs than when we originally wrote this book. So I'm really excited to update it to include like the new Social Security program, funding for single mothers, things like that. I want to make a point that all of our work is inspired by and guided by the experience of people who are system impacted, right? People who've been in prison and deported. So through all of our, updates, through all of our resources, we have quotes from, was that me? I don't, did I log, I think it's, is it? Am I not in the Zoom anymore? Can you? ¿Sí estoy en el Zoom o no? Ah, entonces entro de nuevo. A ver, excuse me. Do you remember what I was saying? Continue. Oh, voices of people. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of the information we do get, like in Guatemala and different countries, is from people who actually were deported there, and some of them are actually doing similar work that we are. So they're kind of like the boots on the ground, uh, just sharing their experience. A lot of the quotes in the book are from formerly incarcerated people that were deported. And some of the people that were deported, they're still in touch with us, and they are still continuing to work, to do research, to update the guides, to receive the guide and just give suggestions of what's changed, what resources have disappeared. So yeah, it's always every year we try to keep it up to date, not just by what we're researching online, but actual people in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico actually going to the shelters, going to the soup kitchens and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening. It's being really slow. Oh, but it's not showing that. Es que no, es que está como tardando mucho. Dice que no. Sí, pero a ver.
Yeah, and well, that's happening. So for me, immigration, going to the U.S. and coming back to Mexico, both times were involuntary. Like Lee mentioned in the beginning, I was born in Michoacan. Maybe you heard of it from Pátzcuaro, the butterflies. And my parents took me to the U.S. when I was 4 months old. And when I got deported involuntarily, I got sent back to Mexico. And I just thought about that this morning, thinking about those two situations in immigration and how that applied to me. Because, like Lee mentioned, I was falsely incarcerated for 15 years for something I didn't do. I was a U.S. resident. I got my residency through the amnesty program in the 80s. My mom is a citizen. My dad's a resident. My siblings are citizens. Uh, so yeah.
Okay, so a couple of quotes, things that we recently deported people share with those who will be deported. Things like the most important thing you can do as a deportee is to make connections while you're still in the States to learn a trade you can do online. That's been a lifesaver for us to be able to secure online work and make US dollars. That's Jennifer. Her partner is Alex, who's in the photo here. Alex was deported to Honduras, but didn't feel safe there and immediately relocated to Guatemala. He says here at the bottom, if you're in prison and have some time, get your documents in order and your families. Take any courses you can, any certificates, even if prison issued, especially anything you can do with your hands, plumbing, carpentry, sheet metal. Oh my gosh. What is that? It's only showing up for me. Okay, it's prompting me to update, but I'm going to ignore that and keep going. Okay, so again, some of the
And that's one of the negatives of technology. Because if we had a board where we wrote everything on there, we would be fine. But yeah.
I'm still on the internet. Let me just.
So I'll just talk more about myself and how it ties into the presentation today. So yeah, after my incarceration, where I was, well, before my incarceration, I was actually coerced, manipulated, and physically abused into taking a plea deal when I was 18. But the interesting thing was, one interesting thing was that even my attorney, the judge, nobody considered the fact that I was not born in the US and how a plea bargain at 18 would affect me after my incarceration. Because I feel that if I knew I was going to be deported, I don't know if I would have so easily have taken that plea bargain, even though I knew I was innocent, because somebody would have been like, well, if you take this plea bargain, you're going to go back to Mexico. And as a kid of 18, I would have probably been like in the US in prison or in Mexico in a place I had never lived. At that time, that didn't seem like, it just seemed like a whole different world. Like, what am I going to do in Mexico?
Yeah, there was actually a Supreme Court decision, Kentucky versus Padilla, after Erick's incarceration, that means the attorney has to inform the client about the immigration consequences of any plea deal. It's not retroactive, so it's not useful for Erick's situation, but it is legislation that was passed afterwards.
And even now, after evidence of my innocence, in order for me, well, the last attorney we talked to, in order for me to go back to court in the US, I would have to still be in custody in Illinois for them to open my case up and look at my case and use the new evidence. Because I'm a Mexican citizen, there's no recourses that I can do or take. And even friends from my neighborhood that went through the same thing, their cases got acquitted, and now they're like in court arguing with the state that's telling them that, oh, it wasn't so bad, because they're trying to give them the least amount of money as possible. But for me, that's not possible because I'm a Mexican citizen.
Just to add to that, if you may have heard of John Burge, he was a Chicago police detective that ran the department in the 80s and 90s. And their culture of the Chicago Police Department was to torture suspects into confessing to crimes they didn't commit. So when the death penalty was abolished in Illinois in the early 2000s, at that point, there had been about 14 people executed and another 15 or so that had been released because of innocence. So John Burge was eventually sent to prison. Several other Chicago detectives' cases, like Reynaldo Guevara, were all systematically reopened. The detectives on Erick's case did not have other accusations of misconduct, and so his case wasn't among those systematically reviewed.
But I will say that one of the kids that made a statement saying that I committed the crime, he was 16. He lived with me because his stepdad was not nice to him. And I mean, like, really bad. And he barely spoke English, but he had like a 35-page confession in English and signed without his parents being there.
There's a lot of wrong with the case. Our current attorney, to quote her, said, "Your case was total bullshit." So, but we have been able to use the experience to come up with something that hopefully is a social good. Not that that justifies it, of course, but that was an attempt at a transition back to the slideshow of what you can use the guide for. So practical things to help you prepare and to help you defend yourself, right? Like knowing your rights, getting legal help, and making a deportation plan. As I mentioned, finding a shelter at the border and staying safe is key, along with getting birth certificates and IDs, opening a bank account, etc. And we also talk about the emotional, social component of it, right? Like navigating culture shock, rebuilding relationships, and even starting a mindfulness practice. As I mentioned, we also have this prison reentry guide called Mapping Your Future, a guide to successful reentry, which you'll notice has similar topics, right? Preparing for release, rebuilding relationships, housing, employment, mental health, substance use, etc. So I've come to see the two processes as fairly similar, right? Someone who's deported and someone who's released from prison often has been separated from their community, separated from resources, and needs this information in order to make a successful transition. We're in the process of updating this book. So we update it every 2 years. We were planning on releasing it much earlier this year, but it's been very difficult to keep tabs on what the heck is going on in the United States. And so instead of waiting and releasing a nice polished, PDF and print version, we're releasing it chapter by chapter. So as Erick mentioned, we have people in each of the 4 countries who are doing research, connecting with nonprofits, interviewing people who've been deported recently. And we just released the first chapter last week. In this print guide, the chapter on Honduras is only 5 pages long. In the new chapter, it's 40 pages long, so it's much expanded. And the goal is to provide clear, practical information for individuals facing deportation to Honduras. We chose to release the Honduras chapter first because we've heard about people being killed after leaving the airport and shortly after deportation to Honduras. We recently learned that the population being deported there has changed too. It's not people who've been in the US a year or two or who just crossed the border and were sent back. It's people who've lived in the US for decades. And so they've sold their property in Honduras, likely their family is no longer left. And so they're returning very vulnerable. So this guide has information on what to expect upon arrival, how to stay safe, housing, employment, education, and more, practical tips for navigating the return and reintegration process, and a directory of organizations offering support. Before I talk about upcoming events, is there anything more that you wanted to share? Then we can also open it up to questions.
Yeah, so what I do want to share is that even though my experience was traumatic for my family and all loved ones and people that knew me and know me, for me personally, I always look on the bright side of things or the other side of the coin, right? Because while incarcerated, you're in a system that's trying to take your humanity away, right? But you meet people, you see a side of humanity that you don't hear about people in prison or in detention centers. One example is everybody pitching in to buy people tickets. Another example is people like in the university, students, immigration attorneys that are trying to create guides, and even the people that are incarcerated and being deported and being treated horribly by these countries, they still get past that and they continue to try to help people in their situation or people that are coming and are going to go through that situation. And for me, experiencing all that, I was able to not just be angry and mad at the system. Sometimes I still get angry and like but overall, I met my wife, I met Rebecca and Paul, dear friends of ours. I'm in San Miguel now, and if that wouldn't have happened, I would not be here.
So Eric, as he mentioned, is the scholarship coordinator. He primarily coordinates the scholarship for people in the state of Illinois who want to pursue higher education after prison. But we also have a scholarship here in Mexico for people who are deported. And one of our scholarship recipients has an incredible story. His name is Cesar Fierro. He is a Mexican citizen who spent 40 years on death row in Texas. He's innocent and he was released in 2020 during the pandemic. And Mexico City filmmaker Santiago Esteno heard about his case while he was still incarcerated in Texas. And he created a documentary called The Years of Fierro. That's the first documentary on this man's case. And this is a follow-up. This is The Freedom of Fierro, or La Libertad de Fierro, that follows him during his release after 40 years in prison during the pandemic. On death row, yeah. He had like 6 execution dates that he came within a couple days of, and he was in solitary confinement for decades. He received our scholarship of 10,000 pesos to take a baking class at a university in Mexico City. And then he received it again this year to take a cooking class. So he's out there trying to be well and do good things. And this is him getting an eye exam during the pandemic. So all our events are open to anyone. They're mostly on Zoom. So I will find a way to get you this link. It's Tuesday. No, that's not right. It's October 22nd. Sorry, I will update this and send the correct information. But we would love to have you join us for a discussion with the filmmaker and with Cesar. And when you register, we send you a link to the documentary so you can watch the documentary before attending the Q&A with Cesar and the filmmaker. And that's all the material we have, but we're happy to take questions. Oh, Eric has some more content to share.
Well, if you guys don't mind, I feel I want to share it just because I'm in this room with you and the art. I mean, I've never really shared it in public, and this will be kind of like a trial run of, so what I do is I write stuff sometimes because I don't remember it all, but sometimes maybe after this I'll think about it and then I'll think of something and add it to it or have a different memory of it or like a different part of this core memory I think about. And I wrote about once, so from Chicago, downtown Chicago, they put me on a bus, drove us to the airport. I don't remember what airport it was. And from that airport, we flew to Denver, picked up another half a plane load of people. And then from Denver, we flew to Texas. So what I wrote, this is years later, I wrote it, and this is what I remember getting off the plane. And if you guys don't mind, I would like to read it. And it's also like a practice run for the writers' conference. Uh, so here it goes. Yeah, so here it goes. No name for it yet. So that's okay. We stepped off the plane in Texas, shackled, hungry, nervous, legs weak as whispers, hands trembling. We didn't crash. How long? 20 years? 25 since I've been on the plane? The heat hits like a fist. Off the plane, straight to the buses. No break, no bathroom, no food, no water, nothing. Still shackled, still hungry, still nervous. A sea of us, a plane load, maybe more. All ages, all brown, descendants of lost civilizations, once again disappearing. I see her, a woman, the only one. Her head down, face hidden, so small, shackled, surrounded by men, most shackled, some free. Immigration officers. I thought they all would be white. Not all white. Some brown, some black, all American, like us. Some look like me, but nothing like me. They are all the same, chest out, eyes hidden, sunglasses on, black, reflective, like aliens. Smirk, contempt, hate. I see us in those pools of blackness, nothing else but us. I don't think they see us. They can't, they won't really see us and still do this. We climb on the buses like a field trip, but no zoo at the end, no excitement, no youthful energy, another lifetime, bright future ahead of us, wrapped in chains, closed windows, grates, two to a seat, sometimes three, sweating, we smell, stink, three buses of us, maybe more, definitely more. Where did she go? She must be on one of these buses, still surrounded, still shackled, head down, invisible. The buses rumble. I forgot how gasoline smelled. Strong, familiar, like dad's old car, like Chicago, like home. We drive off, nervous silence. It's hotter now, stuffy, like bullpens in the county jail. Then chaos. Some scream, some cry, some bang the windows, some grasp for air. I am tense, aware, ready. I haven't pissed since Chicago. Damn, we smell. Still shackled. How long has it been? Buses slow down, stop. No rumbling, we arrive. Where? All I see are fences, barbed wire. Reminds me of Stateville's maximum prison yard. When did it get dark? Shouts rise. Did they ever stop? More banging. Someone passed out. Man, I gotta piss. How long have we been here? We arrived a while ago, still shackled, hungry, aching, back tight, ass numb, still on this damn bus, windows sealed, welded shut, grated, suffocating. Finally, the door opens, deep breath. Is it freedom? Of course not. It smells like dirt, like smoke. What's burning? We get off the bus, shackles rattling, sweating, grunting, air cool but heavy, mouth dry, thirsty, scared, fences everywhere. They heard us, single file. Someone throws up, still shackled, in line. Another passes out, face in the dirt, ignored. Keep it moving. We shuffle towards a fence to an open gate, single file, closer now to the fence, closer to the end, one-way trip, no coming back, legally anyway. The aliens laugh. Are they laughing at us? At what awaits us? What do they know? The line moves, feet shuffle, shackles rattle, cuffs come off. It's my turn. I look down. Aliens much shorter than I thought. Pity behind those black pools. The shackles fall away, a pile of them, hundreds, thousands. Wrists sore. Am I cut? They feel like they're still on, but they're not. In a daze, this is it. Feel like running, punching him in the face. Then I'll be able to stay for a while at least. Things will be different then. Things will change. They have to. We voted for Obama. Someone speaks. What? I hear him now. Why is he smiling? Go towards the bridge? Why? It's pitch black there. No light, no noise, no life. Why would I go there? The burnt smell wafts my nose in the dark. Wood, rubber. Ah, okay. It hits me. Then I see it. That's Mexico, where I was born, where they took me from. I was 4 months old. That's not home, where all my family is. That's home. Chicago, the US, the land of the free. Yeah.
Okay. All of you need to speak to the microphone, so the Zoom people can hear.
My question is whether you know if people who are being deported today are going through the same experience that you have, or what you might know about what's happening with the current deportations, specifically the guy that you and I talked about, who was deported to Somalia.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So you might be familiar, you might have heard of the Mexico Te Abraza program. So many countries now are setting up more formal operations to receive people back to their countries because of the sheer number. And the Mexico program is called Mexico Te Abraza, and they have reception sites, I think, at 12 different points along the US-Mexico border. They're tent cities, basically. The problem that I've heard with them is that in some cases, the person is not freely offered the services, but forced to stay in these facilities, at least for a few days, which, thinking about Erick or someone, after a long period of incarceration, you think you're finally free when you cross the border, and then you're reincarcerated by your own country is obviously highly problematic. But apparently that was what was happening initially, and now it's a little bit more streamlined. People are offered meals, shelter, but there are a lot of really irrational policies, like they buy you a bus ticket to your place of birth. But maybe the person's not going to their place of birth. Maybe they're dropped off in Tijuana and they have a friend they can stay with in Tijuana, but they're forcing them to get on a bus for Oaxaca or whatever. So we've heard about lots of problems with the rollout of this program. But my understanding is people aren't even allowed to just freely walk across the border. Like the Tijuana particular crossing, the main door is shut, and they're like sent into a different space where they're processed by Mexican immigration authorities. You mentioned the man who was sent to South Sudan. So, the US is deporting people to prisons in El Salvador and South Sudan. I got a call from the Secretary of Exterior Relations in Mexico City the other day, who let me know about someone who was just repatriated after being sent to South Sudan, the first Mexican citizen. And I'm like, why are you calling me? But he said, can you help him get, psychological services, relocation, because he's in Michoacan. He was in a Florida prison for 22 years. He's got a neck tattoo. Michoacan has a lot of cartel violence. They're like, can you help get him out of here where he can, live the rest of his life in peace and not be plagued by that violence? And luckily, I was able to connect with an organization called Justice in Motion that helps people post-deportation. They're an incredible organization. They have 15 offices, or it's called their Defender Network. So they work with people in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. An attorney in the US can refer a client who's been deported if they believe their rights were violated during the detention and deportation process, or if the person has a pending labor lawsuit in the United States. And then these Defender networks will connect with people. So Chuy is his name. He called me yesterday to say, Hermana Irma, Sister Irma, who's a Catholic nun who's a human rights defender in Michoacan, was coming to his house and was going to meet with him and assess his legal situation and all of that. So that's a little bit about people returning to Mexico.
Are there people like you in other states working with a similar program?
A similar program like this, not that I know of. There are some college and prison programs in Mexican prisons, if that's what you mean. There's also informal networks of people who've been deported. So when we were first came to Mexico, I didn't know that there were other organizations out there. I think there were very few at that time. But since then, there are organizations that help deported people, like the Rhizome Center for Migrants in Guadalajara. In Mexico City, there's an organization called Otros Dreams en Acción. The idea is like dreamers, but now here in Mexico, it's a mutual support organization for deported folks. And then there's even a Facebook group called Deportee Wives Club. That has blown up. There's a South of the Border Sisters Facebook group and a Casa de los Dreamers, where people are constantly asking questions. In fact, just twice this week, I've spent my evening texting with a woman whose husband was incarcerated or detained. Actually, two of them in the last couple of weeks, both going to Michoacan, where we have connections. His aunt was able to hire one of them And the other one is still in detention. So I was talking her through, what Michoacan's like, what to expect. She's never been to Mexico before. So there's kind of more of those informal networks, but a handful of formal organizations too. Okay.
Does the prison system in Illinois offer this information to the prisoners? How do they find out about it?
That's a great question. So, when our students asked us to write this prison reentry guide back in 2015, we wrote it. And then we thought, okay, what do we do with it? So we'd send it to all the prisons. And, we go into one of the prisons to offer classes. And, sometimes we'll see a box of the books in a broom closet. And we're like, all right, this is not great. But there's also some resistance, as you might imagine, to, these lefty professors coming into the prison universe or coming from the university and challenging things. But that all shifted during the pandemic because the Illinois Department of Corrections needed to release a number of people during the pandemic to lower the population, and they didn't want to be accused of releasing them with no, recourse or information. So our relationship significantly shifted in 2020. They called us and said, we're going to be releasing a lot of people. Do you have any resources for them? And we said, well, we've been producing this for 5 years. It's in your broom closet. But after that, they systematically distribute thousands of copies to the people who are in the prison system, both the Illinois Prison Reentry Guide and A New Path. So it's available widespread throughout Illinois. And then we do have an outreach coordinator who helps us get the resources into prisons, detention facilities, attorneys' offices, whatever kind of organization might be able to use that information in the US. All of our resources are in Spanish and English.
Do you all work like with the Innocence Project for people like Erick to get people who are innocent out?
We don't specifically. When he was in prison and he told me he was innocent, I called the Innocence Project and they said, we only take cases where people have 30 years or more left on their sentence. Yeah. And we're not attorneys, we're, academics. So that's a little bit out of our lane. But we certainly get requests for our materials from those types of organizations. Oh, one other thing I should mention, the Mexican consulate in the US just opened up the first Innocence Project. It's through, I want to say Notre Dame in Indiana, and they are taking cases of Mexican nationals who are in US prisons who have a claim of innocence.
Many years ago, when I was a student, I worked inside of a prison in Washington, D.C. And what I remember is that some of the inmates in the U.S. system were extremely violent and homicidal. And when you come in, let's say ICE has arrested you, do they mix you in with the general population in the prison, or do they segregate you so that you're not mixed in with the general prison population?
So in my case, what happened was that once my out date was the next day, instead of IDOC releasing me, they handed me over to ICE. Then ICE took me to a maximum security. No, IDOC, the Department of Corrections, took me to a maximum security prison for about a week and just basically held me there till ICE came and got me. Yeah, they took me to the whole prison is a segregation, in Pontiac, Illinois. And then like after a week, ICE came and got me. But ICE took me to, they drove me all up and down the state, but I ended up in Wisconsin, that it used to be a county jail, but a few of those wings, it was specifically for people being deported or with immigration. There was nobody mixed from the county jail. It wasn't a prison, it was just like a detention center, or it used to be a county jail that they transformed into a detention center. And interestingly enough, most people that were there had never been to prison. They were just picked up off the street because when they were processing us, they were asking people, okay, give me your last address. And people were like, okay, because they were just out like 6 months ago, a month ago, a year ago, or whatever. And then when they got to me, they're like, give me your last, like, I don't remember my last address. Like, what do you mean? I was like, I haven't had an address like 15, 16 years ago. They're like, what do you mean? Even the people working there couldn't understand that I had come from a prison. And they're like, you were in prison for that long and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, like, oh, well, all right. Like, can you give me somebody's address? Like, I can give you where my mom lives now. Uh, but they had no experience dealing with somebody who had been in prison. And most people there were not in prison. Maybe from me interacting with people, maybe 5 people there had been picked up from prison. But everybody else was, they were working, they were going to school, they were just living their lives.
My memory, from working in this prison is that there were definitely hierarchies within the system. Some people, to control them, they could put them in with a very dangerous person. It was a totally different reality from, normal social type life. Very dangerous. Even the guards were, you had to be very careful of the guards and that type of thing. The ones I worked in, some of them were at that time, morphine was a drug that everybody was using. Those people were totally spent sometimes when they were brought into the prison, going through withdrawals and throwing up for days, and before they could even be admitted into the general population in the prison. But I'm wondering, when they take somebody in on an immigration violation, they don't mix them in with the general population in the prison?
Well, it's because when you take somebody in immigration, you're not going to the county jail. You're not
yeah.
there. You're going to an immigration facility.
Okay.
And even if they did take you to the county jail where you're innocent until proven guilty, they got different divisions in the county jail. And like felonies are in one division and drug cases in another division, DUIs. So I imagine them going to something really low level where there's not really much violence. And I feel that's a misconception also about, I mean, I went to prison when I was 18 and I went to like a maximum security prison. And don't get me wrong, there are violent people there, but for the most part, uh, people are just it's just insecure, underdeveloped men who are growing up in prison. Because even when I got to this program, the Education Justice Project, everybody in that program had already been in prison at least 10, 15 years. Because when I got to this program, I already had 3 associate's degrees. I had 180 community college courses because there was nothing else for me to take. I just kept taking. I have custodial maintenance certificate, horticulture. I mean, I have all of these certificates because there was nothing else. And all the guys in that program, if you came in as a volunteer, that was the safest place you could be. And I do want to clarify one thing also, that the biggest resistance to higher education in prison, it comes from the communities outside of the prison and from the staff. Because while I was there, a main gripe they had was like, why do you get free education and I have to pay for it? I have to pay for my kid's college, and you committed a crime. The person doesn't know me. You don't know that I didn't, but okay. But you're mad at me for trying to get a bachelor's degree while incarcerated, and people feel that way. And even now, it's a political thing because IDOC doesn't care, the prisons don't care, but politically, you have to kind of change with what's going on in the movements and the people protesting. And so my response to those people, and I get it sometimes when we interview people or we do other conferences, like, well, how right is that you got a free education while I'm still paying for it? And my response to people like that is that that's coming from a mentality or a state that assumes that only a specific group of people deserve education, right? Like a social class, like your skin color. That's what dictates who gets education. And I tell them what you should be asking or recognizing is that education is a human right, and that also the question you should be asking is, why am I paying for education at all? Same thing with healthcare. Like, why am I, you're not mad at the doctor for helping some kid. You should be mad at the system that's charging you and putting you into debt for for education that should be free and for healthcare.
Thanks, everyone. This was a nice way to spend an afternoon, even though it's a really heavy topic. Obviously, listening to thousands of people in the US daily. So I'm glad that you were able to come learn a little bit more about it and help resist, right? Thanks.
Thank you, Lee and Eric.